on the value of connecting anchor institutions to broadband internet networks. Schools and libraries have played a pivotal role in American communities since their inception and will continue to do so in the 21st century. To maximize the good work done by community anchors, a connection to high-quality broadband networks will be crucial. Joining us today are 4 experts and practitioners with experience in helping key local institutions connect to broadband networks and then to use that network well. Honore Bray is the director of Missoula, Montana Public Library. Mitsuko Herrera is the Ultra Montgomery Program Director for Montgomery County, Maryland. Susanna Spellman leads the U.S. Unified Community Anchors Network, or UCAN, at Internet2. And finally, John Winhausen is the Director of Schools, Health, and Libraries, the Shelby Coalition. And we're thrilled to have all 4 of you here with us today. A few real quick housekeeping notes before we begin. And first is that due to high interest in this webinar, we are going to record this session. Also, all non-panelists have now been placed on mute. If you are calling in by phone, please make sure to mute yourself as well, because the goal here is to reduce the ambient noise. And what we'll ask you to do in order to ask questions is to please pop them into the chat box on the bottom right. And we will direct them to our panelists and ask them as appropriate, some of them probably toward the end of the call. We're going to begin with a round of introductory questions to each of our panelists, followed by some more general discussion questions, and finally some questions from the audience. Our goal is for this to be more a conversation than a presentation. So I'm going to get started by speaking to Mitsuko Herrera from Montgomery County. Montgomery County is a great example of a community that has dramatically improved internet connections to schools while just as dramatically lowering the cost by the provision of an institutional network. So if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you've done it and the results you've seen.
Certainly. Thank you for having me today. One of the things that Montgomery County had done is that starting in the early 1990s, we needed to upgrade our traffic signaling system. So at that time, we were looking to put in fiber, and what we determined at that point was that it was efficient to lay fiber that would start to reach major county institutions, most of which were on large major roads where we were going ahead to install traffic signaling and so forth. And that's how we started it. We soon were able to move the backhaul for our public safety communications traffic for that. We have, throughout the years, initially we used general funds to construct the network. Over time, we used capital money from our cable franchise agreements. We have leveraged the federal BTOP grant. We have, there's about 450 locations connected with another 60 to go. And there are some locations that as we renovate or we've determined we're trying to add in as well. It reaches, we started with sort of the county buildings where we were offering services. We started with the high schools, we added the middle schools. We have the majority of the elementary schools. There's about probably a dozen or so, and probably maybe another dozen school administrative buildings that we're still looking to add. We, as part of the federal grant, reached all of our public housing, 20 locations. We are working over the next 2 years in adding our rec centers and senior centers. We have all the fire and police stations and libraries connected. And what we've been doing is trying to reach some places that are, Montgomery County is a relatively large county, it's 500 square miles. So connecting the ones that were kind of in the, where the mass of population was, were the easier ones. The ones that are in sort of in further and remoter areas are what we're working on now. We also are completing connections with the community college, and we have the park planning system, the water authority. They are also members of the intergovernmental consortium that we have, and we're working on those. And what we're reaching right now is really trying to leverage more out of those connections, looking to see what types of improvements you need to do for wireless connectivity, improving the gigabit speeds. What we estimate right now is that it costs us about $2 million to operate that network we'd like to add another $1 million for a NOC that will enable us to leverage the system for some economic development purposes. If we were purchasing those services from the market, it was probably a $22, $23 million annual operating cost. Did you want more, Deb, or do you want to?
That's great. I just muted myself and forgot. So fabulous. So much for sharing that information. I know that you've done some great work there, and we'll talk a little more in a few minutes about what you're thinking of doing around economic development. So I'm going to target this question toward John. Can you specifically talk a bit about how the challenges that you have seen in helping the cities in particular, and your effort to help bring broadband access to anchor institutions across the country? And if there's one thing you could give as a piece of advice to our cities that can be done at the local level to improve connectivity, I'd appreciate your sharing that as well.
Well, sure. Thanks, Deb, and thanks again for the opportunity to join. In one sense, the easiest suggestion to make is funding. Anchor institutions need much higher broadband capacity than they've been able to get in the past, and they're growing by leaps and bounds. People are streaming into the libraries, and the schools and the health communities are more and more dependent on broadband than ever before. So the easy answer is that it takes money in order to provide these greater broadband connections. So we were very happy with the BTOP program that provided about $4 billion in infrastructure investment. We're also very happy that the E-rate program added another $1.5 billion annually to the E-rate program for schools and libraries. The more to add to that answer, not just the funding, but what we also need is a change in the mindset of how you purchase broadband services. And I think this is the real difference that has made a significant change over the last 3 or 4 years, is that it used to be that schools and libraries and anchor institutions were used to buying leased circuits from traditional telecom providers. And then when they needed more capacity, then they'd have to order another circuit or add additional capacity by adding more lines and paying greater monthly fees. I think what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is that is not the most efficient way of upgrading your broadband capacity. It's much more efficient, and a longer-term strategy is much better to take an approach where you're taking the future into your own hands and finding ways of deploying your own infrastructure or finding somebody to do it for you or with you. I think the BTOP program really did get the wheels turning about the value of investing in high-capacity infrastructure that is scalable, and you can add capacity very easily once you get the fiber in place or the high-speed wireless. And that, I think, is creating a great number of new opportunities for anchor institutions and municipalities to consider not just the same old way of buying circuits as in the past, but building your own infrastructure that you can then in control of your own destiny. That's really our recommendation for the biggest step that anchor institutions can take in order to increase their broadband capacity for the future, is to partner with their city or their county, or also partner with other business leaders and promote the economic development of the community, and work together to build shared network facilities that everyone can benefit from. So that's our major first step that we recommend that all communities look into, how they can deploy their own broadband infrastructure.
This is Mitzi. I would just add on.
I'm afraid we lost Mitzi.
This is Honor, and I would just add to that also that in Missoula County, we are forming a 501c3 as we speak to be able to provide that service to our own community. And at a lower rate of cost.
Great, thank you, Honoré. That to me makes a lot of sense, that if it can't be done through the city or the county, which they did in Montgomery County, that there be another entity created that can actually do that provision. And we're going to follow up a little bit more on that, and also with John a little more on E-rate in a few minutes. But for the moment, let me go back to Honoré about some of the work you're doing. I was very impressed by the creative things that you're making happen in your library in Missoula. Aside from patrons using the internet directly, can you tell us all a little bit more about what internet access is used for, and maybe give us some of the examples of creative uses of broadband from the work you do in your library?
Sure, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I'll go a little bit about BTOP also. When the broadband technology money was available, our library was able to create a bus that carries 8 computers out into the rural areas where people don't have access, and we don't have a stationary library or a library branch at those places. So it allows people to have the same type of access that we have right in the building. It was a challenge because broadband is a challenge in Montana, and we're just now trying to figure out how we can make it better. Many people in Montana have dial-up resource for connectivity, so they're not able to do many of the things that people do with broadband. So it's really important that libraries offer that broadband capability for the people. What some of the things that we have been doing is our community went to reverse 911, so that if there's any kind of an effort to contact people in the community, they can be contacted through 911 services from the 911 station out to their homes. It was nearly impossible for people to get people to sign up for that service from their home. So we did sign-ups from the public library for 6 months. Every 2 months, we had a group of people that would come in and sign up for the services, so that it made it a much safer place to live in. We do veterans sign up for their health care benefits. Many of the veterans don't have internet access. They live in facilities that don't provide that access to them, and their benefits now and their medical records can be accessed on the internet, but only if they know how to sign up and to actually get those services. So we do sign up from the library. We teach them and their families how to use the site so that they're able to keep up with their medications and their health care benefits. We also host the insurance people to come in and sign families up for the MCA, as people say, Obamacare, once a year. And so we have a great effort to organize that and get someone in that can help people decide what their insurance should be and how they can sign up for that. We have a 3D printer at the library, and we have 2 of them, and for a lot of people it's just fun to see how a 3D printer works. But for many of our entrepreneurs, it's a way for them to make prototypes of the things that they are trying to sell, and by being able to make that prototype on their own, they can redevelop until they have a product that they think is something that they can sell and get a patent on. So it's been really fun to watch those entrepreneurs come in and see the creative minds of the community. Most of the doctors, clinics, and hospitals now have portals for patients, but patients don't have internet access at home to be able to access that information. So we provide public access so that they can do that. Online magazines are a big commodity these days, and if people don't have broadband at home, they can't take part in reading online magazines, so they can come into the library, download them to whatever device they may have, be it a ebook reader or whatever, and as long as they have the broadband to download it, then they can read it after it's on their device. Same thing with ebooks. Many people here come in to print out their airline tickets. They've purchased the ticket online, but they don't have the access to be able to print and download the ticket to their own printer, so they do that here. Applying for jobs, there's very few places anymore, it seems, that people can go get a paper application to be able to apply for a job. So if they try to apply from home and their speed isn't high enough, they get kicked out too many times. So it's important for us to have a dedicated place where individuals can go in and have 2 or 3 hours to fill out job applications, send resumes, all of that type of thing. We proctor exams for students. If they don't have, excuse me, broadband, they're unable to download the exam to be able to take the courses that they need for upgrading their education. And one of the big things that we feel is really important is we're allowed to help people stay connected to their families by having scanners that they can scan pictures back and forth to their loved ones across the country and feel that connection to their families, download photos that their kids send them, and they're not able to do it at home because they have dial-up. And then the last thing that is really popular today is gaming, and it's gaming for all ages, not just kids, not just adults, but something to help them kind of turn the switch in their mind from things that cause them a lot of anxiety to something where they feel like they're part of a group and learn new skills through the gaming community. So we feel like we are able to offer a wide variety of access to people of all ages, and we offer this through all of our branches. And at all of our libraries, we leave our wireless connections on through the night. So we know that in our remote areas up at Seeley Lake and Condon, the truckers use our library parking lots to connect to their families, to their work, whatever, all hours of the day. So we feel like we do a fairly good job, but we're ready to do more once we get better broadband.
Thank you so much. It seems to me that the role of librarian has changed significantly over time, and I'll be asking you a little bit more about that as we move forward here. So now I'm going to target this next question to Susanna. Can you explain what an R&E, Research and Education Network is, and share the value and challenges of such networks? You do such interesting work, and I think folks will want to hear.
Sure, Deb, and thank you again for inviting us to come and present to everyone here. So R&E networks are also known as research and education networks. These are networks that some of which are more than 30 years old or 20 years old, such as Internet 2. Basically, in the 1990s, when NSFNet, which was the primary research and development network for all the universities, was going to be decommissioned by the government, and the actual commercialization of the internet started to happen, you know, with everyone going online with AOL and Prodigy, etc. The university higher ed community came together and said, you know, we really want our own separate network so that we can focus on high capacity, high quality network infrastructure to support IT innovation, internet innovation, application innovation, to support advancing research, as well as education, including distance education. So that spawned Internet 2 about 20 years ago, and Internet 2 actually just serves as a national backbone all across the U.S., interconnecting with 44 different state or regional research and education networks. So, for example, a name of one of them that you might be recognized is Merit in Michigan or MCNC in North Carolina. But each state has or is involved with a research and education network. And traditionally, R&E networks have, as I said earlier, been focused on higher education, but they've also seen the adjacency and importance of their mission and their overall even public service mission and to serve their communities in a larger sense. So they've started to look to work with K-12 schools, with libraries, with healthcare organizations, museums, state and local governments to be able to extend their advanced networks to these organizations to get them on the network and provide an alternative to commercial internet offerings, etc. But to also invite these folks into this broader research and education community that is very not only network driven from the fiber we have in the ground across the U.S., but also a very robust and integrated people network where groups of folks come together to launch new ideas, new programs, play with new applications, etc. So the program that I actually oversee within Internet 2 is focused on just that, leveraging research education networks for community anchor institutions. As I said earlier, K-12, libraries, healthcare, public safety, state and local governments, even community centers, etc. And working with our partners in different states so that they can better serve and reach community anchor institutions and offer alternatives to commercial networks. Some of the challenges that we might have, especially, go ahead, in the research and education community is that, and research and education networks, is that we are non-for-profit organizations, so we do not have large and robust marketing arms or large, robust staffing organizations. A lot of our work is very focused and leverages partnerships across the U.S. and across the community. So that's one of the big challenges. And for now, in most cases, but not in all, they're only serving universities, so they're not working with households, residential, or even businesses for that matter. But there are some regional networks in some states that are open to that. Some states, their regional network is under the purview of the university, and they and their mission statement are limited to only serving certain types of organizations. Some have a much wider scope or opportunity to serve others. But many of them, including Internet 2, I might add, did receive BTOP money as a part of the Recovery Act a few years ago, and do have those interconnection requirements and a mission and a focus to serve community anchor institutions and to improve broadband infrastructure, particularly in the middle mile area. So the door certainly, I don't think, is closed in that area, but it's not been something that has been traditionally a part of the Research Education Network mission.
Unmuted. Thank you. I'm sorry about the feedback. I apologize. So we do have a question related to that I would like to relay because it's so timely to your comments. How do you identify the research networks in each state, and how might somebody go about connecting?
So we have on our website a list of all of our Internet 2 connector research and education network partners. And there you'll have your websites to be able to reach out to those. But you can also reach to me and at Internet 2 directly to help kind of make that introduction, let you know, oh yes, traditionally, that network definitely wants to engage with those types of organizations and connect. Or I might even be able to say, I do know from a fact that they are not statutorily not allowed to work with these types of organizations, but there may be some workarounds. I'll still make some introductions. We'll see what we can do. We can definitely serve as an intermediary to make those introductions and help identify who are those potential partners in each state. So actually just reaching out to USUCAN at
very helpful.
Actually just sorry. I'll put that in the comment thing.
Unmuted.
For some reason, there's a lag in my audio. Again, my apologies. I'm actually on a really good network, so I'm not sure why this is happening. But I'm going to address this next question, please, to John. How do the challenges between urban and rural anchor institutions differ?
So, Deb, thank you for the question, and it's a challenge. In urban areas, you can often afford to build a fiber ring network that connects all of the anchor institutions and the government offices and make very efficient shared use of a common network. In rural areas, it can be a different story because you just don't have as much demand available to aggregate to justify building a shared network to everybody. I mean, we'd like that to be the case, and certain rural communities are able to do that, but in a lot of cases, the rural communities need long lateral builds to connect a rural town to a hospital or to an urban center. And that's where the funding becomes really important, and access to rights of way becomes very important, because oftentimes it's the access to the rights of way that determines whether you can actually build to serve that community or not. There are increasingly wireless options that are increasing their capacity to provide multi-megabit service to anchor institutions in rural areas, and some folks have been able to take advantage of wireless internet access. But in a lot of cases, a wireless connection doesn't get an anchor institution the kind of capacity that it needs for the long term. It may be a short-term fix, but ultimately fiber has unlimited capacity once you get it deployed. But it just takes the money to do that, and what we encourage policymakers to think of as the extending out to the rural areas is an investment, not a cost. So the idea is you can build a future-proof fiber network into a rural area, and that will last for decades once it's built. So it really can be cost-effective in the long run, even though it does require significant investment up front. That's why, for instance, we've been working with the FCC on E-rate reform, and rural areas get an additional discount, an additional 5% discount for all rural areas. But then on top of that, the FCC also offered this opportunity to give an additional 10% in federal funding if the state will come up with 10% additional funding to promote the construction and deployment of new facilities to serve schools and libraries in rural areas. And we think this is an unused, underappreciated change that the FCC made in the E-rate program that is going to kick in next year. We really hope and encouraging schools and libraries and states to take advantage of this funding opportunity. So in other words, if a school or library currently benefits from a 70% subsidy from the E-rate program today, but if the state kicks in 10%, then the FCC will kick in another 10%. So a school or library could go from having to provide 30% of its own funding to only having to come up with 10% of that funding, and that could be a big boon for serving rural areas. We're also working on extending the Rural Health Care Connect Fund to get more broadband built out to rural health clinics and connect them back to hospitals. So the Shelby Coalition is actually working on some proposals now with the FCC to get more money flowing to support rural health care, and we're hoping that that has a big impact on that those networks also are not siloed and built just for the rural health community, but also can be shared and used with the schools and libraries and the neighboring communities, and ultimately the residential community could benefit from these investments as well. So those are a couple of ideas, Deb.
Thanks,
This
John.
is, this is Mitchell. I just wanted to add on to what John had mentioned. I think that in many cases they are similar to Montgomery County, in which you have an urban center and then you have other areas that can have population density that is either rural or similar to rural. It depends on how the federal programs, for example, Montgomery County, almost 150 square miles of the county is an agricultural reserve. We have difficulty. We provide access to the right-of-ways. We have 32 franchise telecom providers in there, but it doesn't change the fact that it costs a certain amount per mile. It is difficult if you have a broadband provider who doesn't want to cooperate and allow you to use or provide you something, and instead you're sort of funding or building something on top of that. John did come out. We have a pilot project now called Ultra Gig, which was done in coordination with a company called Fiber Tower, and they have licenses to exclusive spectrum, and we're looking to see about using that to provide up to 1 gigabit of wireless service. It's a point-to-point or line-of-sight type of solution, and they also work with a couple other providers, but I think the challenge in some of those areas, in the rural and particularly in those areas, is building a strong business case, particularly when you have a smaller number of users. So building into that we are collaborating with several different programs. There will be multiple organizations using the facility. You will be hosting a series of training courses, but it does not, at the end of the day, solve the problem that in addition in those rural areas of getting folks connectivity at the anchor institution, they have to be able to access it from home as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Missy and John.
I'm going to pass over.
Thank you very much, Missy and John. So Deb is, as she mentioned before, having a couple of issues with the audio on her GoToMeeting, which is unfortunately causing some very distracting feedback for panelists and attendees alike. So this is Brendan Roach. I helped Deb out with Next Century Cities. I'm sure I've been in contact with most of you guys at some point. And so I'll just be taking over asking the questions of our panelists. John, just a quick question. How can folks connect with Shelby?
Oh, well, our website is shlb.org, and the long name is Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. So we're a membership organization. We're a nonprofit 501c3, and we have a mix of anchor institutions that are members, also commercial companies, research and education networks, public interest groups, and we receive funding from the Gates Foundation. So we're very happy to anyone who is interested in learning more about us through our website, or you could send me an email at jwindhausen@shlb.org. And we have about 55 members from across the country, and we'd love to have more. So I look forward to interacting with any of you.
Great, thank you. And Shelby really is just a fantastic resource for all these anchor institutions that are looking to take advantage of broadband. Susanna, I'm going to send the next question over to you, but obviously open it up to the floor afterwards. You know, I think one of the main challenges that we've heard from our panelists and that we hear a lot from our member communities is the issue of you know, the important issue of how do you actually fund these broadband connections. So I was wondering if you would be able to share for our audience any sort of funding opportunities that are designed to specifically help anchor institutions connect to broadband.
I think one of probably the most important and critical programs that are out there is, and what John mentioned earlier, is the Schools and Libraries E-rate program that is funded through the Universal Service Fund. In particular, their new opportunity to fund fiber connections. Along with that is the Universal Service Fund's Healthcare Connect Fund, which is also focused on supporting broadband connectivity for hospitals and hospital consortiums. So a group of hospitals or health centers were to work together and they're in a rural area, there's certain percentages as to how much have to be rural versus not. They could come together and put and seek money to build and or to lease a telehealth network to support that. And I think one of the things that's in the Healthcare Connect Fund, and this is I think something that would be a really interesting model for folks to explore, and particularly folks at the state and local level that many on the call are, is to explore how to use these funds together or use one of these types of funds in order to support another. So in the Healthcare Connect Fund, there is some language about how you can leverage this network to support other types of community organizations. But even the FCC has admitted that, we're not sure how that could be done or what's there, but we'd love to see some experiments in how to do that. Because if you're building fiber or you're procuring fiber to a city or a community, these community anchor institutions are usually close by each other. So being able to build out that lateral or provide that connection to that kind of robust network that's being put together for the schools and libraries use or for the healthcare use, I think that's something that I think this would be a very interesting thing to explore. Nobody's done it yet, from what I understand, but being able to work with the FCC, and the FCC has said, and I believe they said it at the Shelby meeting that you held earlier this year, that we would like to see some pilot projects that are being able to leverage these funds to build and connect more than just the type of community anchor institution they were expressly set aside for. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of legal and complex things, but it might be, I think, the ticket and the way to really maximize this very limited amount of money to connect community anchor institutions to better broadband connections. Other funding availability, there is funding that does come out of RUS, the Rural Utility Service, but that is largely focused in very rural areas, of course. There is some funding available, but it's more in applications and how broadband is being used. But in the infrastructure, I think right now, from what I understand, E-rate might be the only, E-rate and Universal Service Fund may be the only shop in town for now. I don't know, John, are you aware of any others?
Not at the federal level. There will be some rule changes coming from HUD, I think, about how to make broadband more available for housing projects. But I think most of the funding action in the future is going to be coming from at the state level. And there are many states, including New York and Illinois and California and Kentucky and others, that are taking up the ball and providing some funds available for infrastructure investment for anchor institutions. And we think that's likely to be where most of the funding, the new funding, comes from in the future. Now E-rate is still going to be a significant source of funding, and I didn't get a chance to say earlier, one of the big things that we like about the E-rate changes is now the FCC is doing much more to encourage investment and encouraging applicants to, well, the FCC has changed the amortization rules and the cost recovery rules, and there are lots of boring accounting changes that they made in the E-rate program, but the basic thrust is to encourage investment in new facilities. And that could be a significant change. And if it works well, then that investment will actually lead to reductions in costs for anchor institutions going forward once those investment costs are paid off. So that could be significant. The E-rate program is going to be significant, but it only deals with schools and libraries. And there are a lot of other anchor institutions that need the same kind of support. And we think probably the states are going to be in a better position to provide that support. And hopefully the cities will also be greatly involved in building out these networks, hopefully with the state support.
This is Michiko. I would just add on there are, and John mentioned the California model, they have a technology fund. Minnesota has a sales tax. Some other jurisdictions, Montgomery County and some places in Maryland, charge right-of-way fees on cable services. There are some other areas in which they are charging right-of-way fees for telephone and broadband. So those can be additional funding sources. And I'd add that in Montgomery County, we've also leveraged that same network We have 7 arts locations, of which they have a relationship with the county that we have also connected. When we used our federal funds, we leveraged it so that it could reach several internet hotels, so that you could get those services. And in some cases, we have partnered with some local service providers as well, so that they can use our facilities to offer various services to schools and libraries.
Great. These all sound like great opportunities. My next question I'm actually going to address first to you, Honoré, just because I thought your response to your sort of introductory answer was really illuminating about all the great things that the Missoula Library is doing and the really unique and innovative services that the library is offering. And you talked a little bit about there being strong demand for digital magazines in the community, and people coming in being able to download books and other reading materials onto e-readers and other devices. And it seems to me that the institution of a library is really changing as content becomes increasingly digitized. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about sort of your thoughts on, what do you think the changes are to the role of librarians in communities?
Well, it's a very exciting time to be a librarian. Libraries have always been looked at as the leveling field. Anybody can use the library. In the past, it provided access to tangible objects, and we see it right now and moving into the future as a place where we don't only lend books and films and all those things that you've been able to borrow forever, but we also lend telescopes so that people can go out and learn about the stars. They can't afford a telescope at home, but they can borrow it from the library. So many other new tangible objects that are too expensive for individual people to borrow, or things that they may only use a couple times a year, so they would come to the library and use them more often. For entrepreneurs, we will be offering things like high-level software on computers, software that they can't afford to purchase at home, but they may only need to use it every once in a while to create something for their business. So it's a place to provide that higher level of quality of life that people aren't able to buy on their own. And then, how to use those products, software, how to create robots. It's way too expensive for kids to be able to buy robotic things at home, but they can come to the library and learn how to do robotics, how it works, and prepare them for the future kind of jobs that are going to be out there. Again, 3D printing is just getting kind of off the ground with individuals, but as that gets more exciting for people, libraries will be more important in providing those kind of services. And there will always be those few people, if not a lot of people, who need to have internet access to do all the things that everybody takes for granted because they already have access at home. So we see our job in the future as doing much more of what we've done in the past and staying just ahead of the ball game and being able to see what's new and what is out there next, so that we can continue to provide that for our community.
Great. And a quick follow-up, which is, if other communities on this call are interested in, really innovating and revolutionizing their library services along what you guys have done in Missoula, what's some advice that you would give?
Well, I've spoken at a few conferences, and the first question always is, well, where do you find the money to do that? And it's just like anything else. You need to shift your focus and your budget onto the things that are helping the community move forward. Yes, we still buy books and movies and we still provide those for our community, but we've taken some of our funding and shifted it to provide things that people are now asking for. So you just have to be innovative, look for money where you can find it, and be willing to be a little risky and see what you can actually do with a small amount of money that makes a huge difference in your community.
And this is Susanna Spellman. The Institute for Museum and Library Services is also a federal agency here in Washington, D.C. that does support innovative new programs that libraries and museums, for that matter, want to promote or push out within their communities. And they have actually even funded a lot of really innovative programs. And their website could be a source of how some folks did this, or it might have materials that would help people learn how to engage with other partners in their community for funding or for donations or for support for these types of things. You know, in fact, we're hopefully waiting to hear about a Internet2, a grant with IMLS, very small, $250K, but largely focused on developing a training program and self-assessment programs for very rural and tribal librarians so they can better assess their infrastructure in their libraries to understand how are they able to support what community services they provide, and also to understand what they would need from a technology perspective to provide services that they aim or want to provide to their community, that their community is looking for. And it also includes some high-level kind of, hey, you might want to put your Wi-Fi router over here, or you might want to have your internet connection over this way, or here are some talking points to help you with perhaps negotiating your connection with your service provider. So, you know, just with that example of that grant, there's all types of support that IMLS does provide to libraries, and understanding precisely what Honore has said, libraries are an immense, powerful digital community anchor institution in towns across the U.S. And the IMLS really wants to help libraries kind of evolve and be able to support their communities in that manner. So I definitely would urge people checking out their website, and I'll put it on the chat line too, because A, there's funding opportunities, and B, there's other libraries that have done cool things and might have products and papers and ideas for you to leverage in your own community.
I think along that same line, Suzanne, is the fact that in Montana we do a lot of shared projects, and the more shared projects libraries can do in their state, the more money that's available for them to be able to do other things. The Gates Foundation is great about supporting libraries and innovative things that libraries do with technology. So libraries have a really great base to be able to find lots of ways to be able to offer innovative ideas to their communities.
This is Mitsuko. I would just add on there as well is that Friends of Library organizations can be a good resource. We had a federal grant that we had put in that was not funded, but the Friends of the Library stepped up, and that enabled, in one particular library, for them to create a youth media lab. The other thing on the IMLS is they're a pioneer of the U Media, which is it's a library model where kids come and they have a hangout space, they have a mess around space, They have a geek out space, which is really, you can just hang out, you could touch devices, you can look at them, and they have classes. I think an underdeveloped area is looking to see how you can leverage your senior centers and those programs. There is a lot of new and exciting things happening around connecting older adults with technology as a means of social isolation. Ending that, it's also a way of encouraging independent living. If you can order your groceries online, if you can call a cab or Uber, if you can do some of your healthcare needs on that way and feeling more comfortable with technology. There was a recent federal housing program that came out that was talking about, that is promoting in some more rural areas, expanding broadband to those public housing facilities, and particularly in areas where you have senior housing. So I would just look at those programs and seeing, is there something that you can put in for a grant or another foundation in which you're leveraging serving older adults, serving youth, doing it out of the community anchor institution, and potentially there's some seed money, but you can leverage that for other money.
And this is Susanna. I just posted a link, digitalliteracy.gov. This was kind of an outgrowth of the National Telecommunication and Information Administration's BTOP program. It was basically an initiative to support digital literacy, to try to organize and pull together different resources for digital literacy, from financial digital literacy that's online, education opportunities, job opportunities, senior citizen resources that are online. But there's a lot of training materials and examples and programs that that many were leveraged by the grant recipients that were funded by NTIA through BTOP with the Sustainable Broadband Adoption, as well as the Public Computing Center offices. But a lot of them are other programs that are available. So this might have a lot of resources for you all to leverage as well.
Great. So I had one last sort of general question for the group before we go into just some closing remarks from everybody. And that was, we had a question from the audience about, how can schools and libraries and these anchor institutions, get started in performing the, analysis of their needs, which is really the crucial first step in making these connections to broadband networks.
So this is, I would say that is a consistent challenge. I've seen different models. Some folks have spent on having a consultant come in and do a broadband report. Sometimes that generally involves reaching out, having a survey. A survey can cost you $10,000 to $20,000, depending on it. But one of the things that you can do that's relatively low cost is to actually go out and start meeting or hosting groups for people to come and tell you what they're looking for. So you can hold them at different locations, so you try to get a different segment of the population. You have a kind of series of questions that you're asking, and you'll learn from that.
And this is Susanna. I definitely think that aggregating the power of the groups of the anchor institutions within each community, so all the schools getting together, even some of the private schools, all the libraries getting together, if they aren't already working together under a system, them coming up together with their needs for broadbands, but then reaching out to those, across the aisle, so to speak, to those other community anchor institutions to see where could schools and libraries work together and leverage a shared investment or a shared interest in improving services within their communities, or health, working with the schools for that matter. And I also think that higher education, universities, could be another interesting partner for communities wanting to extend or expand their broadband access. A lot of them are able to obtain some grants through the National Science Foundation to improve their cyber infrastructure, to improve their ability to support research that could be biomedical research, big data, genomics research, etc. And with that money could be opportunities for the community to kind of branch or launch off of that infrastructure that might be installed or being put in place at the university. So definitely reaching to the university CIO or CTO office for a conversation about how they could work together and leverage maybe some shared resources is another way to see about expanding.
This seems like a real simple thing, but to get your communities to make an agreement that when something is dug up in the streets, that they lay pipe down. It seems to be something that's really hard to convince people of, but it is so important when you're trying to move forward with a project to actually know where everything's at and to be able to map where that wire already is and where you need to go in the future. So when the streets are dug up, it's a good thing to think about, but you need to do it ahead of time.
And this is John Windhausen. I could just add to that, you know, I mentioned in the chat box that Education Superhighway is doing some work to help do some broadband needs analysis for particularly school systems, but also library systems. So that's one avenue. But you know, in a lot of cases, it really is up to the local leaders in a community to take the initiative to explore not just the broadband needs of the anchor institutions, but how it can be part of a comprehensive community development strategy. And this really just takes some leadership and some, you know, gathering meetings and reaching out. So I've heard of a few different examples where maybe a school system says that it needs a fiber network connecting all of its schools together, but it can't do so economically on its own. But if it reaches out to the business community and realizes that it's going to be running that fiber down Main Street and starts to work with the commercial establishments there and bring on the firehouses and the police and other anchor institutions or local government offices or the business sector, all of a sudden a fiber network that wasn't affordable at first becomes very economic once you bring on these other users to share in the cost. And that really is just a lot of shoe leather. It's a lot of local organization to bring the benefits of broadband networking to the forefront and engage the entire community. And that's really, I think the studies that Chris Mitchell has done have shown that that's a much more successful strategy than to try to build a siloed network just for the schools or just for the libraries. But involving the whole community is really a much more economically efficient and just a healthier way to go for the community as a whole.
Great. Well, I recognize that we are at the 4 o'clock hour, which means that unfortunately we are out of time. But a couple of things. I wanted to thank first all of our panelists for their great contributions in this conversation. I thought this was a really helpful and informative call, and I'm sure that all of our attendees agree. Two quick things before I let everybody go. First is, you know, I know there's been a lot of talk about the role of anchor institutions in the community. So I figured this is as good a time as any to make a quick plug for our Digital Inclusion Leadership Awards, which we are presenting in partnership with the National League of Cities and Google Fiber to honor both innovative new approaches to digital inclusion as well as leaders in best practices. You can find information about that on our website under the resources page on the menu up top. Additionally, speaking of resources, we will have more resources on this call and some of the topics raised, including some of the items that were shared by the chat function throughout the call today, and that will also be up on our resources page. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you to our panelists, and we will talk to everybody soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.